Human. Why do you react when I touch you there? The research vessel. Quantum Meridian. Drifted silently through the void between star systems, its hull gleaming under the distant light of a binary pulsar. Inside the sterile white corridors, Dr. Sarah Chen walked with measured steps toward Laboratory 7, her breath forming small clouds in the artificially cooled air. The ship's environmental systems had been adjusted to accommodate their newest crew member, and the temperature now hovered at a crisp 12 degrees Celsius. Sarah paused outside the laboratory door, checking her tablet one final time. 3 months had passed since first contact with the Veltar, and she still couldn't believe she was the lead xenobiologist assigned to study the first alien species humanity had ever encountered. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. The door hissed open, revealing the transformed laboratory space. Gone were the usual human-sized workstations and equipment. Instead, the room had been redesigned to accommodate HFY, the Veltar researcher who had volunteered for the cultural exchange program. The ceiling stretched up an additional 3 meters, and specialized atmospheric processors hummed quietly in the corners, maintaining the nitrogen-heavy atmosphere his species required. HFY stood near the central examination table, his tall, elongated form moving with an otherworldly grace. At nearly 3 meters in height, his pale blue skin seemed to shimmer under the laboratory's artificial lighting. His large, multifaceted eyes caught the light like precious gemstones, and the delicate gill slits along his neck fluttered rhythmically as he processed the mixed atmosphere through his advanced respiratory system. "Good morning, HFY," Sarah said, setting her equipment down on a nearby table. "Are you ready to continue yesterday's comparative physiology session?" The alien's voice emerged from a small translation device attached to his throat, the mechanical tones somehow managing to convey genuine enthusiasm. "Indeed, Dr. Chen. I find your species endlessly fascinating. The variations in human physiological responses continue to perplex and intrigue me." Sarah smiled, remembering their first meeting 3 months ago. The Veltar had approached Earth not as conquerors or even as traders, but as scientists. Their entire civilization seemed built around the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. When they learned that humans were also a spacefaring species with scientific curiosity, they had immediately proposed a cultural and scientific exchange. HFY had been selected as their representative because of his specialization in xenobiology and his particular interest in emotional and physiological responses across different species. His own people, the Veltar, experienced emotions very differently from humans. They felt things on a more intellectual level, processing emotional states through logic and analysis rather than the raw, immediate responses that characterized human experience. "Today, I would like to continue our examination of human tactile sensitivity," HFY announced, his long, slender fingers adjusting the settings on a complex scanning device. "My preliminary observations suggest that humans have remarkably varied responses to physical contact depending on the location and context of the touch." Sarah nodded, settling onto the examination table. Over the past weeks, they had systematically mapped human sensory responses, comparing them to Veltar physiology. It had been an enlightening experience for both of them. The Veltar experienced touch primarily as a source of information gathering, while humans seemed to have complex emotional and physiological reactions that varied dramatically based on numerous factors. "Yesterday, we examined the sensitivity of your hands and arms," HFY continued, consulting his own tablet with its strange, flowing script. "Today, I would like to explore the responses in other areas. Your literature suggests that certain regions of the human body produce particularly strong reactions to tactile stimulation." As he spoke, HFY moved closer to the examination table. His movements were fluid and precise, lacking any of the awkwardness that might characterize other species attempting to interact with humans. The Veltar were natural scientists, and every action seemed calculated and purposeful. "Of course," Sarah replied. "Human skin contains varying concentrations of nerve endings. Some areas are more sensitive than others due to evolutionary adaptations and biological functions." Zephai's large eyes seemed to sparkle with curiosity. "Fascinating. Your species developed such intricate sensory systems. May I?" He gestured toward her with one of his elongated hands, the fingers ending in what humans might describe as small, soft pads rather than sharp claws or nails. Sarah nodded her consent, and Zephai gently placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was surprisingly warm, despite his alien physiology, and she could feel the slight texture difference of his skin against hers. His fingers moved with scientific precision along her collarbone, and she watched as he observed her reactions through his scanning equipment. "Interesting," he murmured. "The nerve density here seems moderate, but your pupils have dilated slightly, and your heart rate has increased. This is different from yesterday's response to contact with your hand." Moving with the same careful precision, Zephai's touch traveled along her arm, then moved to her back as she turned slightly to allow better access for his examination. His scanning device hummed quietly as it recorded data, and Sarah found herself fascinated by the scientific rigor he brought to every aspect of their interaction. Then, quite suddenly, his hand brushed against the side of her neck, just below her ear. Sarah's reaction was immediate and involuntary. A visible shiver ran through her entire body, her breath caught audibly, and she felt goosebumps rise along her arms. Her heart rate spiked noticeably, and she found herself pulling back slightly from the unexpected intensity of the sensation. Zephai froze instantly, his hand hovering in the air where it had been, his large eyes fixed on her with an expression that managed to convey concern despite the significant differences in their facial structures. The scanning device in his other hand registered the dramatic spike in her physiological responses. "Dr. Chen," he said, his translated voice carrying what sounded like genuine worry, "have I caused you harm? Your biological readings indicate a significant stress response. I observed your entire body react to that contact in a way that seems far more intense than previous touches." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized she was blushing. How could she explain to this purely scientific being that he had just touched one of the most sensitive areas of human anatomy? The neck, particularly that spot just below the ear, was known to be an especially responsive erogenous zone for many humans. "No, no harm," she managed, her voice slightly breathless. "You didn't hurt me at all." "It's just that area of the human body is particularly sensitive to touch." Zephai's expression shifted to one of intense scientific curiosity. He lowered his hand but continued to study her with those remarkable multifaceted eyes. "But this response was different from the sensitivity we observed in your hands yesterday. Your entire body seemed to react, not just the area I touched. And the physiological changes were far more dramatic." He consulted his scanning device again, the alien script flowing across its surface. "Your heart rate increased by 37%. Your breathing became shallow and rapid. Your skin temperature rose measurably. And there were electrical changes in your neural activity that I have not observed in our previous sessions." Sarah found herself in the awkward position of having to explain human sexuality and erogenous zones to a being whose species approached everything from a purely intellectual standpoint. The Veltar reproduction was apparently a largely clinical affair involving shared genetic material and controlled environmental conditions. The concept of physical pleasure tied to reproduction was as foreign to them as their intellectual approach to emotions was to humans. "Zephai," she began carefully, "humans have what we call erogenous zones. These are areas of the body that are particularly sensitive and can produce strong physical and emotional responses when touched. The neck, especially the area you just contacted, is one of the most sensitive of these zones. The alien's eyes seemed to grow even larger, if that were possible. Erogenous zones, he repeated, the translation device giving the words a slightly mechanical emphasis. These serve a reproductive function? Well, yes and no, Sarah explained, still feeling the lingering effects of his touch. They're connected to our reproductive biology, but they also serve broader purposes in human social bonding, emotional connection, and general well-being. HFY moved to his workstation and began making rapid notes, his long fingers dancing across the surface of his tablet with incredible speed. This is remarkable, Dr. Chen. You are telling me that your species has developed specific anatomical regions that produce pleasure responses, and that these responses serve multiple biological and social functions? Exactly, Sarah confirmed, grateful to move the conversation into more clinical territory. It's part of what makes human relationships and social structures so complex. Physical touch isn't just about gathering information for us. It's tied into our emotional states, our social bonds, our sense of well-being, and yes, our reproductive behaviors. The alien scientist spent several minutes absorbed in his notes, occasionally looking up at Sarah with an expression that she was learning to recognize as intense fascination. Finally, he set down his tablet and turned his full attention back to her. Dr. Chen, this discovery raises so many questions about human biology and behavior. If I may ask, are there other such zones on the human body? And do all humans respond similarly, or are there variations between individuals? Sarah felt herself blushing again at the clinical nature of his curiosity. There are several such areas, and yes, responses vary significantly between individuals. Factors like genetics, personal history, psychological state, and cultural background all influence how someone might respond to touch in these areas. HFY's gill slits fluttered more rapidly. A sign Sarah had learned indicated excitement or heightened interest. Would you be willing to continue this line of research? This could be crucial for understanding human social dynamics and biological functions. My people will find this information invaluable for future interactions with your species. The request hung in the air between them, loaded with scientific possibility and personal uncertainty. Sarah found herself caught between her professional dedication to the research and a growing awareness that exploring human erogenous zones with an alien scientist would venture into territory far more complex and potentially problematic than their previous work. I think, she said slowly, that we should probably discuss the parameters and implications of such research very carefully before we proceed. This is a sensitive area of human biology that involves not just physical responses, but psychological and cultural considerations as well. HFY nodded vigorously, his understanding of human complexity seeming to deepen with each conversation. Of course, Dr. Chen. Your species continues to prove far more intricate than I initially anticipated. Perhaps we should consult with both human and Veltar authorities about the appropriate protocols for this type of research. As Sarah left the laboratory that day, her neck still tingling slightly from the alien's unexpected touch, she couldn't help but wonder what she had gotten herself into. The scientific implications were enormous, but she was beginning to realize that exploring human sexuality with a being who approached everything from a purely intellectual standpoint might reveal as much about humanity as it did about the differences between their species. The corridor seemed longer than usual as she walked back to her quarters, her mind racing with the possibilities and complications that lay ahead. Tomorrow's session would require careful planning and probably several conversations with the expedition's leadership. The simple comparative physiology study had just evolved into something far more complex and potentially groundbreaking. In her quarters that night, Sarah stared out at the stars through her small porthole. wondering what other surprises awaited them as humans, and Veltar continued to learn about each other. The universe, it seemed, was full of discoveries that nobody had anticipated. Behind her, on her desk, lay the preliminary reports from their research sessions. Soon she would need to document what had happened in the laboratory, putting into clinical language the moment when an alien touch had revealed the complex, beautiful, and sometimes inconvenient nature of human biology. The next phase of their research would test not just the boundaries of scientific inquiry, but the very foundations of how two completely different species might come to understand each other's most fundamental biological and emotional truths. Human. Why do you react when I touch you there? Continuation. The following morning brought an emergency meeting in Conference Room Alpha, the largest gathering space aboard the Quantum Meridian. Captain Maria Rodriguez sat at the head of the polished metal table, her weathered hands folded as she reviewed the reports that had kept her awake most of the night. Around the table sat the key members of the expedition: Chief Medical Officer Dr. James Park, Xenopsychologist Dr. Lisa Wu, Communications Director Commander Alex Thompson, and, of course, Dr. Sarah Chen. Conspicuously absent was HFY, who was currently in consultation with the Veltar High Council through their quantum communication array. The alien had sent his preliminary findings back to his homeworld, and apparently the response had been immediate and intense. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Captain Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the weight of command and barely concealed exhaustion. "Our xenobiological research has accidentally stumbled into territory that could fundamentally change how we understand both human and Veltar biology." Dr. Chen nodded, still feeling somewhat embarrassed about the situation. "Yes, Captain. When HFY made contact with my neck yesterday, he discovered that humans have specific anatomical zones that produce intense physiological responses. This is apparently completely unknown to his species." Dr. Wu leaned forward, her eyes bright with professional interest. "And his reaction suggests that this discovery has significant implications for Veltar understanding of human behavior and social structures?" "More than that," Dr. Chen replied. "According to the communication we received this morning, the Veltar High Council has classified this discovery as a Priority 1 research directive. They want to understand every aspect of human erogenous response patterns." Commander Thompson raised an eyebrow. "And presumably they want our cooperation in this research?" Captain Rodriguez sighed, rubbing her temples. "They're not just requesting cooperation, Commander. They're offering a full cultural and scientific exchange program. Access to their most advanced medical technology, their star charts, their energy production systems. Everything." The implications hung heavy in the air. First contact protocols had never anticipated this type of situation. The discovery of human erogenous zones wasn't just a matter of biological curiosity. It was apparently offering humanity access to technologies that could advance their civilization by centuries. Dr. Park spoke up for the first time. "Captain, from a medical standpoint, this research could be incredibly valuable for human health and understanding. If we can map the complete neurological pathways involved in human tactile response, we might be able to treat various neurological conditions, improve pain management, and better understand the connection between physical sensation and mental health." "And from a diplomatic standpoint," Dr. Wu added, "refusing this research could damage our relationship with the first alien species we've ever encountered. The Veltar seem genuinely interested in peaceful scientific cooperation." Captain Rodriguez looked directly at Dr. Chen. "Sarah, I need to know your honest assessment. Can this research be conducted safely and professionally? Are you comfortable proceeding with this line of study?" Sarah had spent most of the night thinking about exactly this question. The scientific opportunities were undeniable, but the personal implications were complex. She would essentially be allowing an alien being to systematically explore the most intimate aspects of human physiology. "Captain, I believe it can be done," she said carefully. "But we'll need to establish very clear protocols. This isn't just about mapping physical responses anymore. We're dealing with aspects of human biology that are tied to our deepest emotional and psychological processes." "What kind of protocols?" Commander Thompson asked. Dr. Chen had prepared for this question. "First, we need psychological oversight from Dr. Wu throughout the entire process. Second, we need to establish clear consent procedures for each phase of research. Third, we need to involve other human volunteers, so that the research isn't dependent on just one subject. And fourth, we need to ensure that HFY understands the psychological and cultural significance of what we're studying." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Assuming we can meet those requirements, what would the research actually involve?" "Systematic mapping of human erogenous zones and response patterns," Dr. Chen replied. "HFY wants to understand not just the physical responses, but the neurological pathways, the variation between individuals, and the connection to human emotional and social behaviors." Dr. Wu looked thoughtful. "From a psychological standpoint, that could actually provide incredible insights into human behavior. We might learn things about ourselves that we've never understood." As if summoned by their conversation, the conference room door chimed, and HFY entered. His tall form seemed to fill the space, and Sarah noticed that his usual calm demeanor appeared slightly agitated. His gill slits were fluttering more rapidly than normal, and his large eyes seemed brighter than usual. "Honored humans," he said through his translation device, "I have completed my consultation with the High Council. The discovery of human erogenous response patterns has caused what you might call a sensation among my people." Captain Rodriguez gestured for him to take the specially modified seat that had been installed for his use. "We're honored by your people's interest, HFY. Please tell us what the High Council has decided." The alien settled into his chair with fluid grace. "The Council has authorized me to offer humanity access to our most advanced medical technologies in exchange for complete cooperation in this research. Dr. Chen's discovery represents the first evidence we have encountered of a species that has developed physical pleasure responses tied to social bonding and reproduction." Dr. Park leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of medical technologies?" "Regenerative medicine that can repair any injury or illness," HFY replied matter-of-factly. "Neurological interfaces that can treat mental health conditions. Life extension treatments that could increase human lifespan by several 100%. Technologies that could eliminate genetic diseases before birth." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the offer sank in. They weren't just being offered advanced technology, they were being offered solutions to humanity's greatest medical challenges. "In return," HFY continued, "we ask for complete cooperation in mapping and understanding human erogenous response patterns. This research would involve multiple human volunteers and comprehensive study of the neurological, psychological, health, and social aspects of these responses." Captain Rodriguez found her voice first. "HFY, can you help us understand why this discovery is so significant to your people?" The alien's large eyes seemed to focus inward for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Dr. Rodriguez, my people experience reproduction and social bonding through intellectual connection and shared purpose. We do not understand the concept of physical pleasure tied to emotional intimacy. This discovery suggests that humans have developed a completely different approach to social cohesion and reproductive behavior." Dr. Wu nodded in understanding. "You're saying that human erogenous responses represent a fundamentally different evolutionary path for developing social bonds?" "Exactly, Dr. Wu. If we can understand how humans develop these responses and how they function in your society, It may provide insights into alternative evolutionary strategies for social species. The implications for understanding consciousness, emotion, and social development could be revolutionary. Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and nervousness. Her species' capacity for physical pleasure was apparently opening doors to scientific understanding that could benefit both humans and Veltar for generations. Dr. Chen, HFY said, turning his attention to her, would you be willing to continue as the primary research subject for the initial phase of this study? Your responses yesterday provided the baseline data that made this discovery possible. The question she had been dreading hung in the air. Sarah looked around the table at her colleagues, then back at HFY's earnest alien features. The scientific opportunities were unprecedented, but she would be volunteering to let an alien being systematically explore the most intimate aspects of human physiology. I'll do it, she said finally, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. But I want Dr. Wu present for all sessions, and I want complete control over the pace and extent of each examination. HFY's gill slits fluttered in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of satisfaction. Of course, Dr. Chen. This research will be conducted with the highest standards of scientific rigor and respect for human comfort and consent. Captain Rodriguez looked around the table one final time. Then it's decided. We'll proceed with the research under the conditions Dr. Chen has outlined. Commander Thompson, I want you to document everything for Earth Command. This is going to change everything about how humanity relates to the galaxy. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to file out, Sarah found herself walking alongside HFY toward the laboratory. The alien scientist seemed lost in thought, his long strides easily matching her shorter ones. HFY, she said quietly, can I ask you something personal? His large eyes turned to her with immediate attention. Of course, Dr. Chen. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? I mean, really understand? The alien stopped walking and faced her fully. For a long moment he was silent, his expression thoughtful. Dr. Chen, I confess that I do not fully comprehend the emotional significance of this research for humans. My people experience intimacy and connection in ways that are apparently very different from yours. But I can observe that this discovery affects you in ways that extend beyond simple physical responses. Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. It does. For humans, the areas you'll be studying are connected to our deepest emotional experiences, our most intimate relationships, our sense of vulnerability and trust. And yet you are willing to proceed with the research? Sarah considered the question carefully. Because I think understanding these differences between our species might be the key to building a real relationship between humans and Veltar. If you can understand how we experience intimacy and connection, and we can understand how you do, maybe we can find ways to connect that neither of our species has ever imagined. HFY's gill slits fluttered rapidly, and Sarah thought she detected something in his alien features that might have been the equivalent of a smile. Dr. Chen, I believe you have just articulated why this research is so important to both our peoples. Understanding each other's most fundamental biological and emotional processes may indeed be the foundation for a truly meaningful relationship between our species. As they reached the laboratory door, Sarah felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness that she couldn't quite categorize. Tomorrow, they would begin research that could unlock secrets about human biology that had never been systematically studied. More importantly, they would be building bridges of understanding between two species who had evolved completely different approaches to connection and intimacy. The universe, Sarah reflected as she watched HFY prepare his equipment, was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined, and she was about to help map some of its most intimate territories. Human. Why do you react when I touch you there? Final part. 6 months after the initial discovery, the research laboratory aboard the Quantum Meridian had been transformed into something that resembled a hybrid between a medical facility and a diplomatic meeting room. Advanced Veltar scanning equipment hummed alongside human monitoring devices, while representatives from both species worked side by side in an atmosphere of careful scientific cooperation. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display showing a three-dimensional map of the human nervous system, highlighting in brilliant colors the intricate network of nerve pathways that connected various erogenous zones to emotional and physiological response centers in the brain. The map was the result of months of careful, systematic research, and it represented a level of understanding about human biology that had never before existed. "The final data is remarkable," she said to the assembled group of human and Veltar scientists. "We've identified 17 primary erogenous zones and 43 secondary response areas, along with the complete neurological pathways that connect physical sensation to emotional and physiological responses." HFY stood beside her, his tall form casting an elongated shadow across the holographic display. Over the months of working together, he had developed an understanding of human emotional complexity that amazed even the human researchers. His initially clinical approach had evolved into something that could almost be called empathy, though he insisted on describing it as enhanced scientific appreciation for human subjective experience. "What Dr. Chen's data demonstrates," HFY added, his translation device now programmed with more nuanced emotional inflections, "is that human erogenous responses serve multiple biological and social functions simultaneously. They facilitate reproductive behavior, yes, but they also strengthen social bonds, provide stress relief, contribute to mental health, and serve as a form of nonverbal communication between individuals." Dr. Lisa Wu, who had been present for every research session over the past months, nodded in agreement. "The psychological data is equally fascinating. We've discovered that the human capacity for physical pleasure is directly linked to our ability to form complex emotional attachments and social structures." Captain Rodriguez, now promoted to admiral after the success of the cultural exchange program, smiled as she reviewed the final reports. The research had exceeded everyone's expectations, providing insights that were revolutionizing both human medicine and interspecies diplomacy. "What I find most remarkable," she said, "is how this research has changed both our species' understanding of social connection. Indeed, the effects of the research had extended far beyond the laboratory. As the Veltar had learned about human emotional and physical intimacy, they had begun to develop their own new approaches to social bonding. While they couldn't experience physical pleasure the way humans did, they had started incorporating concepts of vulnerability, trust, and emotional sharing into their own relationships. Simultaneously, humans had gained insights into the Veltar approach to intellectual and purposeful connection. Many human couples had reported that adopting some Veltar relationship practices had enhanced their own emotional intimacy by adding dimensions of shared intellectual exploration and collaborative problem-solving. HFY turned to Sarah, his large eyes reflecting what she had learned to recognize as genuine affection, though expressed in his species' unique way. "Dr. Chen, I must confess that this research has affected me in ways I did not anticipate when we began." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious about where this was heading. Over the months, she had noticed changes in HFY that went beyond mere scientific understanding. He had begun to show what could only be described as protective behavior toward her, and had expressed something resembling concern for her emotional well-being during the more intensive research sessions. "How do you mean?" she asked. HFY's gill slits fluttered in what Sarah now knew was his equivalent of nervous excitement. "I have begun to experience what I believe you would call emotional attachment. not in the same way humans experience it, but a deep sense of intellectual and purposeful connection that extends beyond mere scientific collaboration. The laboratory fell silent as the implications of his statement sank in. Dr. Wu leaned forward with intense professional interest, while Admiral Rodriguez looked both surprised and pleased. "Are you saying," Sarah asked carefully, "that studying human intimacy has helped you develop your own form of emotional connection?" "Exactly," HFY replied. "By observing and analyzing your responses, by understanding the vulnerability you showed in allowing me to conduct this research, by seeing how trust and emotional openness function in human relationships, I have developed my own capacity for what I believe is a form of love, though it operates through intellectual and purposeful channels rather than physical ones." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, not from physical stimulation this time, but from genuine emotional surprise. "HFY, are you saying you've developed feelings for me?" The alien's response was immediate and characteristically thoughtful. "I have developed a deep sense of intellectual and emotional compatibility with you, Dr. Chen. A desire to share experiences, to protect your well-being, to collaborate with you in both scientific and personal endeavors. If that is what humans call love, then yes, I believe I have developed feelings for you." Dr. Wu was practically vibrating with excitement at the scientific implications. "This is incredible. We're witnessing the development of interspecies emotional attachment. The neurological and psychological data we could gather from this." Admiral Rodriguez held up a hand to slow Dr. Wu's enthusiasm. "Before we start planning new research protocols, I think we should focus on the personal implications for Dr. Chen and HFY." Sarah found herself looking into HFY's alien eyes, searching for something familiar in features that were fundamentally different from anything human. What she found there was a sense of connection that transcended species boundaries, a meeting of minds that had developed into something deeper and more complex. "HFY," she said slowly, "I have to admit that I've developed feelings for you too, though I never expected that to be possible. Working with you, seeing your genuine curiosity and care, watching you develop new forms of emotional understanding, it's been incredible." The alien's entire posture seemed to brighten, his gill slits fluttering rapidly and his large eyes seeming to sparkle with an inner light. "Dr. Chen, would you be willing to explore the possibility of developing a relationship that incorporates both human and Veltar approaches to emotional connection?" Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Admiral Rodriguez immediately activated her communication device, her expression shifting to one of alert concern. "Admiral Rodriguez here. What's the situation?" Commander Thompson's voice crackled through the speaker. "Admiral, we're receiving priority communications from both Earth Command and the Veltar High Council. They want immediate reports on our research findings." Admiral Rodriguez looked around the laboratory with sudden understanding. "They've learned about HFY and Dr. Chen's personal relationship, haven't they?" "More than that, Admiral. Apparently, news of the research has spread throughout both human and Veltar space. There are requests from dozens of planets for cultural exchange programs based on our discoveries. Everyone wants to understand how different species can develop meaningful emotional connections." Sarah and HFY exchanged glances, realizing that their personal research had implications far beyond anything they had imagined. Admiral Rodriguez stood up, her command presence filling the room. "It looks like your research has just become the foundation for a new era of interspecies diplomacy. Are you two prepared for that level of responsibility?" Sarah looked at HFY, then back at the Admiral. "I think we're ready, Admiral. If our relationship can help other species understand each other better, if our research can contribute to building connections across the galaxy, then yes, we're prepared." HFY nodded his agreement, his translated voice carrying new emotional depth. Dr. Chen and I have learned that understanding each other's most fundamental biological and emotional processes is indeed the key to building meaningful relationships between species. If we can share that understanding with others, we would be honored to do so. As alarms continued to sound and communication requests poured in from across the galaxy, Sarah realized that their simple research into human erogenous zones had become something much larger. They had accidentally discovered not just the biological basis of human intimacy, but a template for how completely different species could find ways to connect emotionally and intellectually. The universe, it turned out, was not only stranger than anyone had imagined, but far more connected. Different species, different evolutionary paths, different ways of experiencing emotion and intimacy could all find common ground in the desire to understand and connect with others. Over the following years, the relationship between Dr. Sarah Chen and HFY would become a model for interspecies emotional connection, studied by scientists and diplomats across dozens of worlds. Their research would lead to medical breakthroughs that would benefit multiple species, and their personal relationship would demonstrate that love and connection could transcend even the most fundamental biological differences. But on that day, standing in the laboratory as alarms blared and the galaxy waited for their response, Sarah and HFY simply looked at each other with the wonder of two beings who had discovered that the greatest scientific discovery wasn't about biology or technology, but about the infinite capacity of conscious beings to understand, care for, and connect with each other, regardless of the form that consciousness might take. The research that had begun with an innocent question about human physical responses had evolved into something far more profound. Proof that the universe itself might be held together not by gravity or electromagnetic forces, but by the desire of all conscious beings to reach across the vast emptiness of space and touch, in whatever way they could, the mind and heart of another.